Hello again, people at home and around the world. We're here again inside the Noman School of Visual Effects green screen hangar in the Noman store on the foothills of a tremendous presentation by the gentleman from Hasbro. We're sitting with James Carter and Jan Lagori. Greetings to everyone on the East and West Coast and the teams
Hello.
at Hasbro. You've done them proud this afternoon.
I hope so.
Yeah, I think that we got a small taste of what goes into the manufacturing making of some of the world's favorite brands. I'll say it right out of the gate. It's a real pleasure for me to sit with these gentlemen as a long-standing fan of the G.I. Joe franchise, going back all the way to 82, 83, I think, is when some of the first action figures graced our home with the the real American Hero 3 3/4-inch line. That was some time ago, and things have changed over the course of your presentation. You talked a lot about technology and a lot about articulation and different types of plastics. We'll get into that, but for the time being, I'd like to start off and say, James, you have had a long path and a long journey that has led you here. You started as a fine artist and moved into industrial design. Tell us a little bit about how this whole thing transpired.
Oh, okay. So,
from the beginning.
Oh, yeah. Well, I always wanted to make my own action figure. So it just whatever I could find, whether it was Play-Doh, whether it was Super Sculpting or whatever. Right. So I never thought, hey, I could actually have a career doing this. But I also loved movies as well. So I went through graphic design schooling with my in Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia, because my parents were like, well, you got to stay, if you want to be in the art industry, you got to be a graphic designer. You have to get a job there. That's the only way you can do it. Yeah, a stable commercial position.
Or architecture in some cases. Some people get leaned on for architecture.
Yeah,
exactly. Serious artists.
Yeah, and the whole time I kept thinking, I like doing this, but I don't love doing this. I want to have a career that I love doing. So I went through the schooling, I finished out and did that for my parents and everything, but at the same time, there was still something was missing within me. People around me loved what they did. They were doing graphic design, not me. Right. I was still going home making my models, making my toys and stuff. So I ended up seeing a commercial on TV about the Art Institute of Pittsburgh, and I thought, hey, that's what I want to do, special effects for the movies. Let me get into that industry.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and so at that time, friends of mine went through the school in Pittsburgh and everything, and then we decided, hey, we want to go out to LA. We want to get into the movie industry. We want to be like Lucas. We want to do that kind of stuff.
Town.
Absolutely. How could you not? I know it's that's
well, we're here now.
Yeah, that's who we all grew up with and everything. Those movies on the big screen and stuff. But the reality set in and everything that hey, once you're making those models, once the movie's done, then you got to find another gig. So I wanted that steady gig. I wanted something else. And a friend of mine contacted me that I went to school with. She said, hey, you know what? That stuff that you learned in school for industrial design, a lot of that can be used for what she does. And she was working with Kenner Toys at that time.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So legendary Kenner Toys as well.
Absolutely. So she told me just give me a call. I'll put your name in and everything. So I started off in the model shop there, applying the exact same things that I used in school. Just that industrial design aspect of it and making molds and working with different plastics and everything, and started to slowly sneak up to the sculpting department and went on my lunch breaks and stuff and befriended those guys up there. And yeah, they said, hey, well, you can use some of the wax, use some of the materials that we use. Try your hand at it. And I did it. I loved it. I sculpted Scooby-Doo and Shaggy, and I took it up to those guys. They loved it, and they said, hey, do you want to be part of the sculpting department? And from then on, I was hooked, and I was always making toys, and I didn't see myself doing anything else, and that's all I've ever done. I've tried doing other jobs or something, and like this has always pulled me back in, and I love this industry. I love making toys.
You keep getting pulled back in.
Yeah.
It seems that through that, what we can safely deduce is that you were interested in the tacit feel of things. From what I'm taking, as an artist, you were not being satisfied with the flat representation of things, and that you wanted to bring them out into this tangible place where you could feel and touch them.
Absolutely.
It's the running theme, really, for the weekend across this 3-day summit is that there's this interest to see something in the round and be able to manipulate and move things in forms in 360 degrees, and then be able to actually sort of hold it, and we'll get to that. Through this conversation. But then moving on to Jan, you actually are versed in fine art as well. You had that as your major in university. You have a tremendous fine art background in painting, and you end up as a sculptor. So talk to us a little bit about being a painter academically in that period, in the beginning. How did that transpire?
That whole career trajectory, I wanted to be an illustrator. Right. As a kid, I wanted to be an ornithologist or an illustrator. So ornithology was kind of out because I really gravitated to art. I was drawing constantly, and my strong suit was drawing. You know, pencil was in my hand all the time. I took painting in college because I wanted to try something different. And I really enjoyed it when I started doing it. I loved that paint, and just oil paint was my paint of choice, and it got everywhere and was messy and nasty and fun.
Viscous and thick.
Right. You could build up forms, you could do all of that, and that was great. I loved that feeling. And thinking about it now, that was sculptural. That whole part of my brain was thinking sculpturally. So then when I got into the Natural History Museum building models.
That's the Natural History Museum in Cincinnati, right?
Right.
For those watching at home.
Right. And there was an Ice Age exhibit, and I was building extinct animals, and all that was left of them was bones, so we would go in and we would measure the bones, and the scientists would point out, you know, this is the muscle attachment, this is where it would go. Right. So it was kind of like building on top of an armature. So doing that, it was like, that was really where I got a passion for art even more. And that led me, I was just walking in the halls one day in the museum, and somebody said, "Have you seen the back of this magazine? Hasbro's looking for people." And I thought,
at the museum.
I know, it's like,
the reach is long.
Right. It was like, I never thought of that. Just like somebody has to sculpt it. I just never thought of it.
Right.
And so I applied, and they had me do some clay work for Batman. I did a Batman figure and a girl's toy, and they liked it. And from there on, you know, I started as a temp. I came in after work at the museum and worked for like 3 hours because I really wanted to do this. I loved it. And yeah, they hired me on, and then I was there for like 4.5 years, and then I had a freelance career.
Right.
Pretty much working for Hasbro, but some other companies. And it just kind of took off, and it was like, I just sat in my office one day thinking, who else has this job just creating and guaranteed a paycheck? It's like, oh, this is great.
Maybe like, you know, yeah, I can name a couple of people, maybe like Bill Frisell, a jazz musician, maybe that's somebody who's like got a guaranteed thing where he's creating something and able
I know.
to like,
I mean,
few people.
It's kind of like, you know, being that athlete that makes it. I really felt like that. I didn't take anything for granted. I wanted to make sure I made those deadlines. Right. I wanted to make sure that the quality was there. There were times when, you know, they would say, "Oh, your game's a little off." Right. But, you know, I really did want to impress and make sure that it was done. And that's important, I think, for anybody in the field, in the art field. Right. Just have to make sure you're on top of things all the time.
That continual sort of drive to push yourself forward and arrive at new conclusions, I think, is really an irreplaceable sort of aspect of it all. You mentioned like you wanted to see and be a part of it as well in this physical thing that was happening at the museum with the bones is not dissimilar from what we just talked about. There's this idea of like, oh, I'm painting. It calls to mind as a departure, not to sort of go off into fine art talk, but I think Rembrandt at the height of his career, towards the end of his career, which is the height, I think he was already going in that direction. I think had he been able to live much longer, he would have transitioned into sculpture, because the paintings are like, they're almost, they're fighting gravity, you know? Right. When I see them, they're like...
When I'd go into a museum, too, it drives my wife nuts, I think, but I'm up there looking at the painting and seeing how they threw on that paint. Yeah. It's like, it's so cool, though, to see how this stuff flows, and it is sculptural. Right. And two, I don't think you can be a good sculptor unless you can draw. Right. And especially now more than ever with ZBrush, because I'm drawing on the Cintiq, and it's line that I'm looking at, and it's what's in between that line.
Wow, okay.
It's just, you know, it's what we do is all form-based. There's all the line involved, and everything in between is what creates that structure.
That energy and flow of things, right? Absolutely. Speaking of smelling paintings, at the LACMA, they had a Caravaggio exhibit where I think I was almost unceremoniously removed for being too close to one of the Caravaggios. The security comes screaming and says, "You can't get away from that paint." And I'm literally like this. I'm, you know, sniffing the paint and go, "What are you doing?" And And I said, "Oh, I have it now. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's what I came for. Have a nice day." The way she thought I was insane.
That happened to me at a museum too. It's like,
He's sniffing
there's
the
a line on the floor. You've got to get behind.
Yeah, I
I'm
had
not gonna
crossed the
touch it.
threshold. I had crossed the threshold, and the woman came running. He's trying to sniff the paintings.
I was looking at a Monet, and I'm thinking, this is great.
Right,
It's like,
no sniffing. So people at home, don't sniff the painting.
no, that's bad. You'll get caught.
You will definitely get caught. I was going to say, you've mentioned that, there was, I want to ask both of you actually, you have a great responsibility, historically speaking, because it is the sort of modern art of toys,
Right.
to me. Over the past 30 odd years, there have been, with Hasbro, certain brands, they've got G.I. Joe, Transformers, there are certain ingrained personalities. Let's talk about that and some of the stresses, or how does that affect you as an artist to know that there's going to be a very, very discerning eye, maybe even more discerning than yours, on the
Right.
other end of the packaging.
Well, the one thing too is with aesthetics, it's very subjective.
Right.
And I really look at it as we're entrusted with the Hasbro brands.
Right.
And to a lot of people, that means a lot.
Right.
And to me, it means a lot because this is my job, and I really take it seriously. And as a kid, I had different toys that I grew up with. I didn't have G.I. Joe, that came along later. Star Wars, that came along later.
Right.
But I have nephews, and I hear them talk, and it's like, some of this stuff, like George Lucas is a god.
Yeah, right.
And to a lot of people, Hasbro is heaven,
Right.
because G.I. Joe, Transformers, that is their childhood.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I think
I'm included in that as
right.
well.
And I think we all take that very seriously. We don't want to put out bad product. We're constantly pushing ourselves to challenge ourselves to do better aesthetically,
Right.
to hide things that, they're the mechanical part of it, but to make that so it's not sticking out. Because I've seen a lot of figures, and they're actually balls on a stick that stick out of somebody's shoulders. Like,
Right.
who's doing that?
I don't disagree with you. There are some that I'm not, which will remain anonymous. I'm
Yeah, I
not
won't
gonna
talk
I'm
about
not
it.
calling names at this point. I think that there was, for a period, there was a time when the toy business was very turbulent, actually.
Right.
And I think that Hasbro had a real lock on a couple of things. When it comes to licensing, for instance, if you go back into the 80s, now I'm going to get into sort of the history of action figures. Kenner, with their Star Wars line, made, it doesn't need to be recounted. The amount of money made on the toys is more than the films for Star Wars. But that's like a fact. They were not the most articulated figures. They were actually quite sort of simplistic in their construction, and the plastic used was sort of very soft, and you could bite the thing and get a lot of damage if you had a little brother or a cousin come over. You hide that stuff, And I think that. Hasbro, with the G.I. Joe line, there was a different type of plastic. I was going to get into that, actually, and talk about plastics and how things have changed for the better, I think, in some ways. In so much that during that period, I think there was really not a lot of competition for a minute, because it was the go-to 3 3/4-inch action figure.
Right.
And that's the bottom line in that period. And so I think towards in the early 80s, there's a couple of lines that came out. I think Mattel had some Secret Wars action figures, which were not as posable, and I think that the posability, which is a main topic of discussion today, I think that's what sets apart your products and your brand, was that commitment to engineering and that commitment to being sort of at the forefront of how something is articulated.
Right.
How do you do you feel the same way about that? Because I think that's like the crown jewel, was that you could have that posability.
Yeah. Well, with the action figures anyway, with the brands like G.I. Joe and Transformers and Star Wars, like you were saying, these are brands that we grew up with, that people who are now making those decisions and making those calls and those figures, myself included, I'm making toys that I grew up with, that I want this to be the best possible product out there, because I'm still a toy collector myself. So I'm thinking, okay, am I going to want to buy this? The designers, all of us, across the board, am I going to want to buy this?
How you dreamed of it before, when it wasn't being produced as you saw it.
Yeah, okay, this is what I thought, these figures could have used this and this and this when I was a kid. Now we have the chance to make those decisions and everything, and not only to filling those gaps with our childhood that might have been missing with those pieces, or he might have needed this gun or this kind of articulation. But we're also creating something, this new standard, to where the fans are getting a lot more discerning, to where they want that quality. They now expect it. So it's not even a matter of just giving it to them. Like, we have to deliver on that and go beyond that. So we're always pushing ourselves to make the best product possible, because we're fans of this stuff too. We had the stuff on our shelves in our offices, so we're comic book guys, we're Star Wars guys, we're fanboys as well, and it's the greatest job ever. So I couldn't see myself doing anything.
I feel the energy. I wish you could feel it back at home through the camera. Like I said at the beginning, I was humbled and happy at the same time to sit with these guys. It's a real honor. I think what you're saying is electric, to be honest with you, and I think it's just a wonderful thing. And I want to actually draw attention to something. If I could get that piece off camera, this is how far things have come. I'll take the first one, which is a one from the 1989 line, which is a Snake Eyes from 1989, and we see that there's been a tremendous degree of always some of the best packaging, I would say.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely, the artwork has always been, hands down, one of my favorite things of all time. That's how that ends up staying in a package. But in this particular vein, you'll see that even the plastics being used during that period have transformed. And I think that we can speak freely and openly about it being a byproduct of new technology like ZBrush being implemented and giving more capacity. We can pass that around. Yeah, you can touch it too.
Oh, yeah.
Plastics, they have their own properties, and you've got to be smart how you use them. But with PVC, there's different...
Just give them the mic.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry about that.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
With PVC, there's different, what they call durometers. Sorry.
We can hold that one.
And the different durometer means it's softer or harder.
Right.
So that really has changed the way toys are made. Right. I mean, before they were ABS, they were hard.
That was a lot of harder plastic.
Right.
We're sitting here. You can't really see that on the camera. But it's safe to say that is a plastic from some time ago. The rivets are completely different. You don't use those rivets anymore in production.
No. G.I. Joe was known to have that because a lot of people customized them.
Yeah.
So you could take them apart, you could unscrew the back and change. You can change them out. So that was one of the thoughts though of keeping that structure because the fans loved that because they could customize.
Right.
But now with the technology, like I said, hot water with vinyl, you can pop off those joints and you can customize your own pieces with PVC without having to unscrew that back.
It's much softer as well when you touch it. I wish I had forgotten this morning to bring it. I had the latest version at home.
Right.
And I had it open. I wanted it, and I completely gapped on that. I'm really sorry, everybody at home. And I'm sorry. It's part of my interview was to have it and say, look at the comparative sort of analysis between the two types of plastic. You could see it in the packaging, even without opening it, that there was in fact a marketable difference with the way it's composed and constructed.
One of the things too, with the advancement just in time and doing these so long, the manufacturers do things that we didn't really plan. It's like smaller discs for wrist joints. It's like once they do it, okay, you can't tell us you can't do it because you've done it.
Right.
And so it's like with those advancements, and a lot of it's trial and error. You get stuff, you get results, and you're really happy with them. It's like, yeah, we can do this now. We can make this better. We're constantly striving to make the aesthetics better. We know we can improve as we go forward. Absolutely. ZBrush has helped that, I think. I think it's helped it tremendously because there's so many kids now that are in that digital realm.
Right.
And really their work is inspiring to me.
Me too, every morning,
It's like with you guys with ZBrush Central, when I first looked at that, it's like, holy crap.
Yeah, right. Beep.
I've got to do that.
I'll be the filter.
I didn't say the whole word, but it was that was in my head. It's like, I've got to learn this.
Monday to Sunday, I wake up in the morning and say, oh my goodness, look at this. This is like just this tidal wave of artistic, just goodness in my face all the time.
Right. And when I get inspired, I do go online. I go to ZBrush Central. I look at other people's work. It's amazing what's out there.
We're bouncing around a lot, and you're sort of leading me into these things. You mentioned other people's work. Going back to something we talked about earlier about painting and art, who are some of the artists that you admired or still admire? Or what inspires you? Like you showed the Bob Dylan.
Right.
So we know that.
Musically, Bob Dylan. Yeah, right. I grew up in the 60s, and then the 70s hit, and music kind of was suffering a little bit with disco.
Right. Perfect segue for something I want to talk about. That's a perfect segue. You know, before we forget, hold on a second. This brings us to a question that I've been dying to ask you. We've got the, for those who really are in the know, there was an exclusive figure a couple of years ago produced called Pimp Daddy Destro.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Let me ask you, because this is probably the only time anyone's ever going to get to ask this question, really, outside of coming into the office. How does that decision get made to take a character like Destro, who is a villain in the G.I. Joe sort of world? How do you come to the corporate decision at that point to make a Disco Destro for Comic-Con?
I wish I knew, but I wish we had more people like that in the building now. I mean, I like thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
The creativity is what's needed.
Right.
And, you know, we have it, I know, but those off-the-wall things that happen, I have no idea why those decisions are made. But
okay, fair enough.
I'm glad they happen.
Yeah, there have been moments of very progressive sort of, if you remember, if you're a kid of the right age, there was a time when you could clip the sort of UPC codes on the back and send it in, and you'd get this little brown box, and you'd be waiting, you know, you'd send in $2 Canadian. Yeah, and you'd get your little brown box. The mailman would come with your Cobra Trooper, you know.
And you're in heaven.
Basic trooper with a gun, and you're like, straight arm, you know.
We have done some of that recently, because I know that excites kids. That kind of stuff, you know, getting that surprise in the mail, getting
Absolutely. But I want to take a minute. Can I get the other one? Oh, it's right here. They're waving at me and telling me it's right here. So this is fast forward to today, which is the first ever character debut of Darth Malgus. And we see that the figures have, this is a little bit bigger than 3 3/4, I would imagine. Actually, I noticed that in the more recent lines, there is a variation in height based on some of the characters. Is that on purpose, to sort of give some more characterization?
Yeah,
please.
Go ahead and answer.
Oh, okay. So for that, it's with the 3 3/4, it's now an established size. Okay. So even though if a figure might not be necessarily like 3 3/4, there's that acceptance of, okay, this is still a 3 3/4 figure. Right. But to get that detail, to get essentially to give it that more of that Michael Bay effect, where it's a little bit more over the top, and to get even more of that realism, we realized, hey, we have to start making these figures just a slightly bigger. So like,
you're seeing that here.
Yeah. So when you're getting to figures where Darth Vader is like this completely towering character. Right. If you start him at 3 3/4, that means everybody else has to be smaller. So to give him that imposing nature that he deserves and that he is, you have to start scaling everybody up. Right. And now kids and everyone and fans, they're so discerning with their taste and everything, because now movies with the special effects that are amazing to us, that's commonplace for everybody else right now. So it has to be within toys as well. They have to take that next leap forward, and if they have to go a little bit bigger, they get that detail, but still being within this same universe of 3 3/4. By all means, the fans accept it, the kids accept it, but they know that figure's he's not completely 3 3/4, but he's still within that world.
We'll take it. We'll take it all day long.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that we'll take it all day long. And again, for the record, paying homage to the vintage packaging of the Kenner days of Star Wars, it's safe to say that. I mean, that actually is historically significant to think about that. There was a time when licensing was extremely exclusive and a very cutthroat thing, and lately, over the course of the last sort of the most recent history of action figures and collectibles, licensing has been more flexible. Mm-hmm. And you're seeing sort of, you know, I would never have imagined as a kid that there would be the type of Star Wars action figures that you've been producing lately. Mm-hmm. I just saw a couple on the toy shelf the other day. I was going through the Toys R Us with my wife and my newborn baby. Oh. I said, hey, let's pass through the action figure section for a moment. You know, just let's check out and see, maybe they have some toys for girls, some action figures for little girls. Yeah. You know, I say, oh, well, look at the Star Wars. You know, these are made by Hasbro. they're friends of ours and clients. So I think it's, again, hands down, some of the most interesting packaging. So kudos to everybody who's making this happen.
Thank you.
I'm getting the finger wheel in the background telling me that it's time to sign off from the back room. So I'd like to shake hands with you one more time and say thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, Carter. Thanks so much, Jen.